Bleacher Report has recently come out with an article disrespecting Blue Jays star Jose Berrios. So in this video, we're going to break down what the article entails and why they believe that the Jose Berrios contract will be a nightmare in the future. So let's break it all down. So Jays fans, Nick Gosse here, host of Jays Digest. And before we do get into the video, I do want to remind you guys that we are on the road to 1K subscribers. And you guys have been showing tons of support lately. You've been killing it. So if you do enjoy the videos, hit the subscribe button, because over 95% of you guys who watch these videos are not subscribed. So it would mean the world to me and Peter if you do, hit the subscribe button. Keep leaving comments, keep liking. We love talking to you guys. So just wanted to throw that out there early. We are on the road to 1K. And 500 is pretty close, so it would mean the world. But an article came out today by Bleacher Report, and it was basically an article ranking naming all 30 MLB teams a nightmare contract. So they did it from a nightmare contract up to 2024, meaning that they kind of took the future into account about who would have, the worst contract for each respective team. So I was looking through it and I was thinking, who would the Jays be? My guess would be Yusei Kikuchi, but that was not the case. I'll pop it up here real quick. It is Jose Berrios. So the contract details: $17.7 million in 2024, $18.7 in 2025, in 2026 as well as $18.7. In 2027 it is 24.7, and obviously in 2028 it is also 24.7, which is a 7-year, $131 million deal. So I saw that and I was like, okay, that makes a bit of sense. Jose Berrios, obviously, we inked him to a huge deal. Before I get into the exact article and what they say, I'll quickly break down the Jose Berrios, how his career as the Blue Jays have went so far. So obviously we traded for him last year. We traded him for Austin Martin and Simeon Woods Richardson. Now Austin Martin at the time, he was, I believe, a 5th overall pick or 4th overall pick for the Blue Jays. He had a lack of power on the Blue Jays, but coming into last season, when we had him in a prospect pool, he was highly regarded. He was, supposed to be a 5-tool player, playing center field. Everyone in the Blue Jays farm system, he was outcompeting them. And people on the Blue Jays front office and fans alike, if you were a part of, if you weren't a Jays fan then, if you didn't know, people on Reddit, people everywhere were really just raving about Austin Martin and how he would be our next center fielder or even a different position. But obviously, it didn't work out as we traded him, and it seemed that we traded him at the right time. We traded him to the Minnesota Twins for, obviously, Jose Berrios, and we also gave up Simeon Woods Richardson, who might end up being the bigger piece out of those two there. So, Austin Martin, we traded him at his peak value, and now he's kind of fallen off a little bit. He's still hitting for great contact, but his power was a major issue with the Blue Jays, and it continues to be a major issue in Minnesota. So, what we gave up for Berrios wasn't too bad. Simeon Woods Richardson made his major league debut this year and did pretty good. He's probably going to be a phenomenal starter in this league, probably a 3-4. But we traded, we had to trade our prospects for a proven pitcher, which is what we did in Jose Berrios. Now, Berrios came to us last year. Coming into the Blue Jays, I believe he had around a 3.38, 3.48 ERA. In however many starts, and then he came to the Blue Jays and he just stuck with that. He had, I believe, a 3.58 ERA in 19 starts or something around there, and he did last year what he is paid to do. He is a workhorse. He gives you innings. He battles every single start, and he's very consistent. And coming into this last year, that's what everyone expected from him. So we obviously inked him to that 7-year, $131 million deal, and we expected him to give us that. He's not an ace. He's not really a 2-starter. He's probably on a World Series contending team, a 3-starter. But obviously this year he blew up a little bit. But in his whole career, he was a mid-3 ERA starter and someone you could really rely on to give the ball. He was the opening day starter for the Jays. Obviously before Manoah had his crazy, season that was just amazing. No one could ever believe that he did it. But Berrios was that guy coming in that we gave the ball to in opening day because we gave the huge contract. Now, last year was a different story. He had a 5.23 ERA, was 12-7, meaning he did win a lot of the games, but he was either super great or super bad. It was not the Berrios we paid for, and it's not the Berrios we really got to know over his whole career. His whole career, his median was just an average, slightly above average pitcher, consistency, wouldn't have tons of ups and downs, but he'd stay solid, which is kind of what, we expected, and that's what we paid him for. But this year was a different story. So this leads into let's talk about what they said. That 7-year, $131 million deal felt like a good idea this past offseason, but then Berrios went out and allowed more hits and more runs than any other AL pitcher in 2022 that was qualified. Now it feels like a nightmare contract, and that 2-year, $49 million player option when he's into his mid-30s and probably throwing fastballs barely in the 90s is really going to hurt. Now, do I disagree with what he's saying? It's kind of... they're not totally wrong in the sense of... Berrios wasn't really... He had a horrible year. But is he going to be? So he had a horrible year, and obviously it was rough for the Jays. But to call it a nightmare contract is a little excessive, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, he's been great his whole career, right? So he's had however many years he's been in the career in the MLB, like 6 years or whatever. He's been consistent, he's been solid, and I'm personally not really worried about that contract because I know that I mean, realistically, this was an outlier year, right? I don't know what got into him, but he had games where he was dominant and he was really an ace starter. And then he had other games when he was horrible, giving up like 6 or 7 earned runs. So it's really a tough call for the Blue Jays, and you don't really know why that happened. But to call it a nightmare contract I think it's a bit of an overreaction. I think it's a bit disrespectful to Jose Berrios, given the fact that his entire career up to last year was phenomenal. So to name it a nightmare contract after 1 year is a bit excessive, but I mean, what else do you expect at a Bleacher Report? Now, to their credit, they had to name one player on each MLB team, and I guess given the fact the article is expressing a nightmare contract into the 2024 year, it makes a bit more sense why they go with Jose Berrios because there's no other really nightmare contracts in the Blue Jays. The closest one would be Yusei Kikuchi's 3-year deal, but even then, I don't really. It's not that much money, and it's only for 3 years, and one of them's already gone, so 2 more years now. So I guess their only choice was to go with Berrios, but calling it a nightmare contract is a bit excessive, and it's a bit disrespectful to Jose, as he had a pretty bad year, yeah, but he still went 12-7. He still gave his team a chance out there most times he started. Obviously, it was a really bad year for him, but I just wanted to touch on the fact that, like, for all you Jays fans out there who are concerned about Berrios, I understand it. But you have to understand that this guy has been solid his whole career. Literally his whole career with the Twins, and even last year with the Blue Jays, he's been solid. We have a good pitching coach in Pete Walker, so I don't think there's anything super crazy to be concerned about. I think he bounces back next year and has between a 3.5 and a 4 ERA, and I think he's our number 3 or number 4 starter, depending on who we get in the offseason. Now, I would also like to touch on what they said here. When he's in his mid-30s, throwing fastballs, barely in the 90s, is really going to hurt, along with the 2-year player option. When you're signing these stars to long-term contracts, especially in, I guess, Toronto, well, they're starting to become a free agent destination, but not as much in the past. But now, you're paying these players for their first, like, 3 to 4 years of prime, and then whatever after that, obviously you're not paying, like, them to produce the same way they will, because no player in their mid-30s is going to produce as well as they were in their prime unless you're Justin Verlander. But like it's a similar situation to George Springer. We paid George Springer, and he's not going to be an elite center fielder and maybe not an elite hitter towards the end of his contract. He probably still will be great, but you don't pay these guys to be great the whole time. You're paying a lot of money so that way you have them in their prime for that 3 to 4 years. So we're paying Berrios to be in his prime over the next 3 to 4 years, and then the past 3 years. Hopefully by that point we'll have won a World Series anyway, and then it doesn't really matter. So to say that is a bit interesting. I understand what they're saying. I also don't think his fastball will drop that bad. I think it'll stick between 93 and 94 his whole career. But to say that is a bit weird to me because obviously like they're gonna have fall offs, and all pitchers do have fall offs. And prior to this last year, I would argue that a lot of people would agree that Jose Berrios is probably a player who you'd want to have into his late 30s just because his curveball is so amazing. His fastball, he doesn't rely on velocity super. He relies on it a little bit, but not too much. He relies on the movement of his pitches, so you'd think he'd age well. I just think it's a bit of an overreaction by Bleacher Report, and I just wanted to point that out. Going into just one quick player, I checked the Yankees, their most overpaid contract, or their nightmare contract, as Bleacher Report calls it, and it was Giancarlo Stanton. Obviously, he has a massive deal, but I think Giancarlo Stanton, like, it's kind of a similar thing. Obviously, he is getting paid a lot, and he's not a good fielder. He's not healthy all the time. Like, that makes a bit more sense to me as a nightmare contract as opposed to the Blue Jays Berrios, where, like, if he has another bad season next year, then yeah, we can start talking about a nightmare contract. But he's been great his whole career, and he just had one bad year. You don't want to hate on him too much for that. But I understand the Bleacher Report had to pick one player from each team, so I guess Berrios would be the best option there. If you guys leave in the comments who you think they should have picked from the Blue Jays, I know Kikuchi probably would have been my pick, but obviously it's into 2024. But yeah, the only major thing again is what the end there where it says that 2-year player option, whatever. We probably had to give him that player option in order to have him signed, and after given the prospects we gave up, we kind of had to make that happen. We had to re-sign him. So it's gonna end the video. I know it was a bit of a different one. It was solo today, a bit less structured, but I hope you guys did enjoy it. Let me know how you did feel about the video in the comment section below. We are on the road to 1K subs, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and let us know any other content you want to see in the future, any feedback you have. So thank you so much for watching. Cheers.